everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Let's Talk Astrology. In today's episode, we're talking about empty houses. Joining us today, we have our esteemed faculty members, Donna Young and Vanessa Ludberg. So thank you both for coming back on the show again today, and how are you doing?
Great. How about you, Callum?
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. Very excited for this one today. So today's topic, we're talking about empty houses, and it's a question that comes up quite a lot. So the question I would like to ask you is, what information can we glean from empty houses? Do we just ignore them and see where the party's happening? Or what can we do when we're looking at empty houses?
Well, I would always say that, of course, when you have a lot of planets in a house, your attention is going to be drawn there. So that's kind of a given. We go there. We know that those are areas of life where there is going to be an emphasis. But of course, when we're looking at a chart, each of the houses represents a different area of our life, and we all have those areas of our life. So we do have to look at them when we're doing our chart analysis. And what we're going to do when we have an empty house is then look to where the ruler of that house is and what condition it is and so on to get more information about what might be going on in that area of life.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Vanessa?
I completely agree. We can get a lot of information about the empty houses by looking at the condition and the placement of the ruler. And very often the two life areas are going to be linked together in the native's experience.
Absolutely, absolutely.
We can see how that expresses.
So today we're actually going to pull up a few famous chart examples that we're going to look at today. And we're going to look at some of the empty houses and look at their life they've lived so far and see if we can, again, glean some more information. So here we've got Angelina Jolie. What do you want to start with today?
Well, we've got a few empty houses that I think are really relevant for her. And the first place where my eye went was actually that empty fifth house. We know that Angelina Jolie actually has a lot of children, 6 children, 3 adopted internationally, 3 biological. And so we know that, that's an important aspect for her. So where do we look to? We look to the ruler. I tend to stick to traditional rulers, but I think you could look in either direction. So we would look at Mars as the traditional ruler, and we can see that Mars actually is in rulership. It's in great shape in rulership. It's angular. It's in the 10th house. It's really close to the moon, which is the ruler of her chart with a Cancer rising. And also to that Jupiter via the moon and the MC. So we get a whole bunch of information about not just about the fact that she loves children, but that actually becomes a part of her profile, how we identify with her, and how her reputation in the world is somehow attached to that.
That's a really good example. And again, we've got Mars ruling the 5th. Now, of course, the charts we've got up here are in whole sign, which we do use in 101. But if anyone watching this would like to use a quadrant house system, so for example, Placidus, we'd actually shift some of those planets into the 9th. Now, some astrologers, I know Donna, Vanessa herself, sometimes we fuse house systems together and look in different house systems. But we can also look at Mars ruling that 5th in the being in the 9th and the 10th as well. So I know I think she adopted from Cambodia and from Vietnam as well, from children. So we've got some of the 9th house topics and of course the 10th house topics as well, which is really interesting. Vanessa, what would you like to? Yeah.
I would love to talk about that empty 7th house. If the 7th house is about committed partnerships or really any kind of partnership and marriages, we see that it's an empty house, but we know that Angelina Jolie has been married multiple times. And so we would then look to the ruler. It would be Saturn ruling Capricorn, and we see it is in her 1st house. So positioned in the 1st house, we know that marriage and partnership and commitment is going to be very important to Angelina in one respect. But then we would have to also look at the condition of that Saturn to find out more information about how those partnerships played out. I don't know, Callum, do you want to say anything about that?
No, that's a really important point if we're talking about dignity and planetary condition. So again, if we go to a Placidus, that Saturn would be in the 12th. But for the sake of argument, we're looking at the whole sign chart. Now we've got that Saturn, and this is not to say if anyone out there is watching, you've got Saturn in Cancer ruling the 7th, that you're going to have always relationship issues. But I found it interesting what you've got here in the bio, Vanessa, is talking about as well having difficulties with emotional connections with other people or partners. So again, we've got that Saturn in detriment ruling the 7th. And if we look at that moon, which we've talked about briefly before, we've got that moon in an applying square to that Saturn, also conjunct her outer set malefic. So it's understandable in a sense that having some of these emotional, difficult relationships with one-on-one partners, where I think the relationship with children would be a little bit easier or a little bit better. So that's just some of the things that come to mind, maybe when we're talking about relationships for her.
That's great.
And of course, you know, we're looking at empty houses, but if we take that, we've got that Venus at the partile square to Uranus. So we've got instability here as well. So again, when we're looking at charts, we're not just looking at one thing, we're trying to tie everything in together and look at different parts of the chart. But I agree, that 7th house, that just screams, you know, just because it's empty doesn't mean there's nothing going on in relationships. There's plenty going on in relationships with Angelina Jolie.
Yeah, for sure.
Fantastic. Okay, so we're going to move on to Tiger Woods. So is there anything in the chart here, empty houses, that we would like to speak to for Tiger Woods' chart?
You had some great ideas about the empty 6th house of health.
Yeah, so if we look across the chart here, again, we've got it in whole sign. We've got an empty 6th house. So again, just because it's an empty 6th house doesn't mean the themes in there aren't coming up in the life theme for Tiger Woods. Now, what's interesting about the empty 6th house, we take the ruler, which is Saturn. So we've got fixed air for the 6th house. Saturn, in this case, again, if we go back to condition, Saturn is detriment, it's retrograde in the 12th house. So again, anyone watching that, don't worry if you do have this, but pertaining to his 6th house of health, it is interesting. He has had a few stints in hospital. I know he had that awful crash where I think he mangled his legs. And interestingly, with fixed air Aquarius, it was also to do with his ankles. And I believe he had a rod placed in there as well, and back issues and all those kind of things. So this is just a good example of that. Just because the 6th house is empty, this particular theme that we're talking about in health-wise, if we're looking at condition of the ruler, doesn't mean there's nothing going on there. Again, as Donna was saying before, let's go and look at the condition of the ruler and what's going on with it. So I think this is a great example. Anything you would like to add, Donna and Vanessa, for this chart?
Yeah, I mean, that empty 7th house again, we're having a theme here. Now, Pisces, in the first place, that who had a lack of boundaries around relationships? Tiger Woods did, as it turned out. And certainly we know that can be a Pisces issue. But there again, we're going to look to the Jupiter to see what kind of shape that is in. And we can see that this Jupiter is in the 8th house in Aries. And it's got a whole bunch of connections. It's trine the Neptune. So again, you know, that Neptune, we would say, if you're using a modern rulership, that's the other ruler of the 7th or of Pisces. So kind of adding to that theme a little bit. And the opposition to Pluto. So there's a whole bunch going on with that Jupiter that is changing his life forever once all of that scandal gets uncovered. I mean, he's able to hide that for a really long time, if memory serves. Mm-hmm. And then when it comes out, it just blows up. And really, I'm not going to say it destroyed his life, but wow, it certainly took a punch on his income. And, you know,
he's been a naughty boy more than once, family. I think, in his lifetime.
He's been a very naughty boy. But up until he was discovered as a naughty boy, he was like a hero to people, right? Like he was so looked up to.
Absolutely.
But it's so interesting how his attitude towards relationships had such an impact on the financial axis here.
Mm-hmm.
Playing into that 2nd house, 8th house opposition.
What was the story with that? So did he have to get divorced and have to pay a lot out? I'm not sure. I'm not familiar with that, with the story.
He, as far as I know, his wife discovered he was cheating, and then it turned out that there were a lot of other women, and he lost many of the endorsement deals because he had been looked up to as this exemplary figure and this role model. And it turned out that he, I think in your words, was a naughty boy.
Yeah. And I think too, you know, the other empty house, of course, that he has is the first house. And of course, first house, he has a body. Indeed, he does have a body. And I would say in terms of his athleticism, his body has served him very well. So what is it that we look at? The Mercury. The Mercury is in Capricorn. And, you know, it's a Virgo ascendant, Mercury chart ruler. And as we were talking about it, golf is really a game of what's going on in your mind. And it's interesting to me, like he's this amazing, amazing golfer who seemingly can do no wrong. Once all of this scandal gets revealed, his golf game just tanked. He was not able to get out of his head in order to do, you know, his whole career. So it really messed with his head, his chart ruler Mercury.
Interesting that Mercury is also ruler of his 10th.
Yeah. And found in the 5th. So it's like this house of gaming and whatnot too.
And risk.
So kind of, and risk. Yeah.
Yeah, the empty first is really, really interesting. We've got that mutable earth. So again, that precision, he needs to be a golfer. You've got the chart ruler seeing the ascendant. I mean, we're about 2 degrees separating, but we're quite tight to seeing the ascendant. So bringing that in as well. So I think that, again, it reaches to the importance of, if anyone watching this, you're looking at your own chart, just because you have an empty house doesn't mean the themes of those life aren't coming in. Again, what we're doing here and what Donna is doing is looking at, well, the first house, we're looking at the chart ruler. We're going around, as Donna was talking about, the 7th house. I'm talking about the rulers there. And then we're starting to build this picture, because that's really what we're doing. We're building a story, we're building a picture. And if we're working with clients, this is what we're doing as well. So yeah, very, very interesting empty houses. Okie doke. So next we're on to the very famous Elizabeth Taylor. So what do we want to say about Elizabeth Taylor in terms of empty houses?
Well, hard to avoid that empty 7th.
All right.
Do you have anything you want to say about that?
It really, you'd think, pulling up the chart of Elizabeth Taylor, who's been married, what, 8 or 9 times? So many times, and you see an empty 7th house and you're thinking, well, what's going on there? You'd expect it to be full, maybe a stellium in there, but again, it's interesting as we look. So again, we've got mutable air in the 7th, so we're looking at Mercury as the ruler of the 7th. Now, I know, Vanessa, you brought up something very important about this particular Mercury, and that what ties into a 7th house.
Yeah, so this Mercury is in Pisces, it's in detriment, but it's also Cazimi. And so to me, Cazimi often manifests as, you know, you look at the houses that Cazimi planet rules, and it tends to be a life area that the native values beyond all measure, that it just becomes the most sacred thing in the world, the most valuable, most important. And that's how the Cazimi tends to play out. And we know from Elizabeth Taylor's life story that marriage in particular was just the most important thing in the world to her. But if we look at the Mercury and Pisces, you know, how did those marriages play out? And Callum, I think you are a Mercury and Pisces native.
I am, yeah.
More eloquently about that than I can.
So again, you know, if we're talking about dignity, Mercury in Pisces is in a special place. So not only is it detriment, it's fall as well. So sometimes that can operate in ways that go against society. So if you think, even in her day and age, getting married 8 times, that's really going to, I mean, divorce was such a taboo subject in the times that she was marrying and divorcing. So again, the ruler of the 7th, detriment and fall, going against the grain of society. And it's interesting you bring in that Cazimi. So I know a few astrologers will give Cazimi a minute, but regardless, this is within what, 10 minutes? So we know this is definitely Cazimi. So as you said, Vanessa, maybe a special place in her heart that she had for these marriages and these relationships. And again, I think you mentioned this before, we've got that tight opposition to Neptune in the 10th as well. I don't know if you wanted to say more about that real tight Mercury-Neptune opposition.
Just that, you know, when you're going to delineate the ruler of the empty house, you will also be bringing in all of the aspect relationships that ruler makes. And we see it's in this tight opposition to Neptune in her 10th house. And that energy of, having all these marriages ended up being what she was very, very famous for. That was her, her reputation. She's legendary, Neptune word, for being married so many times. And, even though marriage was very, very important to her, if you look at the mutable 7th and the mutable ruler in Pisces, commitment, not so much.
Well, I mean, we might jump to the conclusion without even looking at the ruler with a Gemini on the 7th house cusp that there would be multiple marriages. That's 2 of at least, right? So, or maybe not marriages, but partnerships anyway, relationships. But then you look at that Mercury being in Pisces, like, oh, so romantic. So I'm going to guess that she would have been really drawn to that. She probably was in love with falling in love, that idea. And so when you see people like that, and that Neptune opposition really kind of confusing the issue, or you're not seeing things really clearly when Neptune is involved, right? So she would have fallen in love over and over. And as we know, sometimes with the same man more than once. She married the same man more than once. So there's that romantic nature to her that's always going to be in play.
I think that's a really good point. Encapsulates, I think, me for Elizabeth Taylor, falling in love with falling in love. I think that it just encapsulates what she was really about through all those years. Absolutely. And of course, we're talking about empty houses. I mean, if you want to look around the chart, we've got that Venus detriment, Partac conjunct Uranus, so the stability of the relationships, cardinal fire. We can bring in those elements as well. But again, just looking at empty houses, we can delineate this way and take a look. So anything else we want to say about Elizabeth Taylor?
Maybe
here's another, we've got another empty first house, and she certainly also had a body, a very attractive one, as we know from her legendary screen roles that she played. She was a beautiful, beautiful woman, and ruled by that Jupiter in the 9th. So this real kind of exotic persona that she portrayed, the beautiful, I remember as a child watching like the beautiful, beautiful clothing that she would wear. Like she was always playing some sort of a goddess kind of energy. And then of course that empty 2nd house as well. And she certainly made a lot of money, not necessarily so much from her acting, but from her perfumery. I don't know that she
we'll
had
take
a perfumery,
that.
but she had perfumes. Yeah. And that Capricorn on the 2nd house with Saturn as the ruler, that Saturn, although it's in the 3rd house, it's in pretty good shape, in at least as the traditional ruler of Aquarius. That Saturn is not in bad shape in rulership there, all other things considered. So those things didn't play out so bad for her at all.
And Vanessa, you made an interesting point before the recording about that Saturn as well, ruling the 2nd.
That the Saturn is in fixed air, ruling the 2nd. She made her money in perfume, that lingering scent, that fixed air that hangs around. And we see that it is in a trine to her midheaven in the 11th. And that's one of the things that she shared with the world, how she connected to the public was through this scent empire that was incredibly lucrative for her.
Absolutely. And I think it made her more money than even all the acting and everything else that she did after that. So incredible.
And the scent's name, I think the famous one was White Diamonds, and it was the whole diamonds are forever, big Saturn word.
Yeah.
But I love this again, talking about, sorry.
Oh no, just that the diamonds and the whole, the diamonds are forever, and yet there's that marriage story underneath.
Exactly.
It's more like the diamonds keep coming.
So it just shows you these empty houses, how the themes are operating there, but we're having to look, we're going to have to look at the ruler and the conditions, as Donna has just been talking about. Okay, empty first house, we look at that beautiful Jupiter and fixed fire. It's kind of that look at me, I'm on stage, and the beauty and the grandiosity of that Jupiter, and Vanessa talking about that cardinal earth, second house, building an empire through fragrance, and you've got that Saturn domicile in fixed air. And again, as we're going around the chart, we're just building this story, which so much applies to Elizabeth Taylor. I think it's a wonderful chart example. Okie dokie. So let's go on to Michael Jordan. So anything that we want to talk about in terms of empty houses?
I'd love to tackle his empty 10th, because we know that Michael Jordan certainly did have a fantastic career.
Absolutely.
Where do we find where do we find the ruler of his 10th house? We find it firmly planted in the second house of finance, money, income. And we know that Michael Jordan was a fantastic star athlete, but more than anything, he was a fantastic marketing. He was one of the most well-endorsed athletic figures of all time, and he was the first NBA history billionaire, I think.
I think that's right. And that's such an important connection. So again, okay, we've got an empty 10th house. So you think to yourself, oh, nothing happening in career. Well, there's plenty happening in career, but we've got the 10th and the second house connection as well, with the ruler in there. And again, the abundance and the wealth that is built over time. And like I've told you before the recording, actually across from my house, there's Laney High School in Wilmington, North Carolina. So if I ever see any paparazzi once in a while, it's usually Michael Jordan coming to speak to the kids at the gym and to play basketball with them and stuff. And just I think a great character, I think, overall. So absolutely.
And what I think that might even connect to his Cancer rising. There's another empty house and another person who definitely has a body. And a body that performs at a very high level. But that Cancer rising, we're going to look to the moon to see what's going on there. And that's going to give us more information. So here he is, this kind of international persona, but this moon sitting in the 6th house, that's just part of what he's doing on the day-to-day, right? He hasn't lost so much touch with his roots. And there's another place that we could go, an empty 4th house, if we're talking about his roots. The 4th house, the 4th house ruled by that Venus, another, empty area, but yet we know that that's important to him. And that Venus is sitting in the sign of Capricorn in the 7th house, and right on the descendant. So, and the area, his whole chart is really a lot about how he's connecting with other people, the emphasis on the relationship side of the chart. So those ideas are really important to him. And he makes sure that he goes back to his roots in order to make those connections with people. I love that.
I think that's a beautiful description. And if we go back to that Venus also ruling the 11th house, and he does, again, we've got another empty house here, but 11th house themes, he does a lot for, wider communities. And, I think when he came back to Wilmington, what was it? Hurricane Florence, I think, is one of the bad ones that we had, where we had to escape the town. And he came back with, to all the community and giving away and all these wonderful things with the community. So again, as you're saying, Donna, that sense of home and that connection, but also helping his community and coming back and not forgetting where he came from, type of deal. Absolutely.
That's great.
It's nice.
Wonderful. Okie dokie. And next,
good for him.
Say that again.
Good for him.
Good for him. Yeah. Done well for himself. Certainly done well for himself.
Well, and doing well for himself, but not forgetting that he didn't get where he was without having the people behind him, right?
Absolutely.
Didn't forget where he came from.
And that giving, I love that as well. And if we go back to that chart, I know it's not empty, but I love that Jupiter domicile, in the applying connection to the midheaven as well. So he's seen as this wonderfully giving person. Okay, he's made billions and he's made a lot of money, but he gives back to the world and society as well. I think even abroad as well. I'm not sure. I'm gonna have to re-go through his bio, but I think he's done a lot for many causes. Absolutely. Okay, so on to our last chart today as we're looking through empty houses, and we have Deepak Chopra. Am I saying his name correctly, Vanessa?
Yes.
Okay. So I don't know a lot about him. So would you like to tell us a bit about this character and empty houses? What can we delineate? What can we look at in the chart?
Well, Donna, we know that you've actually you've had the privilege to see Deepak Chopra in real life.
I have.
You might be able to speak to this, start off this conversation.
And I have to tell you, though, I did see him live, but he was a little bit too sciencey for me. It was quite a bit over my head, I'll admit. So he speaks at a very high level. But one of the things that we certainly can observe, we know that he's a prolific writer. And where would we normally look for where we might find writing? The third house. And look, we've got nothing there. But Venus is the ruler, of course, of the second house. So where do we see the Venus? And that is indeed in the 10th house, not tight to the MC. And as Callum has mentioned with some of the other charts, if we weren't looking in a whole sign house chart, then that Venus would be in the 9th house. And a connection can be made either way, which, you know, when I'm looking at charts, I'm looking at more than one house system because I want to see where the planets land. And I think you can find a case for both of the houses in charts where planets will flip from house to house. So it's not a thing that I would argue over at all. But that Venus certainly, regardless of which house system you're using, is going to be playing a significant role in his chart, whether you're looking at the career from the 10th or all of the work that is, I mean, the 9th house is heavily concentrated regardless, where he is, you know, really on this mission to search for the truth and doing all of this research and going around the world, gathering information to deliver us his insights. So I think that Venus is playing a big role, of course, in how that is playing out. I mean, we could look, if we're looking at the 9th house, that Jupiter, obviously, you know, that's a packed 9th house. Yeah. And the Jupiter is the ruler of his empty first. So, you know, either way we look at it, we're getting kind of repeating information, which is always what you want to do with astrology anyway, right? You're not going to just look to one point. You want to get these kind of recurring themes.
Absolutely. So
those two areas kind of jump out at me.
Fantastic. And Vanessa, I know there was an empty house that you thought was quite interesting too.
I'm looking at that empty second house again here, and we see that it is an Aries ruled by Mars back up there in this packed 9th house of sharing the word. You know, he makes his money by sharing the word, sharing his information. And, you know, his message is, you know, the power of positive thinking, or if you can align your emotions, your body will follow. And the action is in the belief system. That's where you can actually make a difference for yourself. So I think if we talk about Mars being the motivator in Scorpio, which is the deep emotional roots, the depths, that's where Deepak Chopra believes, that's the philosophy, 9th house. You know, that's where you're going to find a way to get something done that's positive. And it's right next to the Mercury here, fusing it, you know, with the ideas, what he talks about, what he thinks about, what he studies.
So again, a lot of activity, as Donna's saying, and you're saying, Vanessa, in that 9th house. So again, we go back to that Jupiter. It's the chart ruler, the empty first. We've got the rule of the, excuse me, the rule of the midheaven as well. Vanessa, you're talking about that real strong Mars, that Mars domicile. I think it's the sole dispositor of this entire chart, conjunct Mercury. And hasn't he come out with so many books, and he does so many tours and talks? Is that right? He's always 9th house themes, is it, with his life?
And at some point, I think he was commanding $30,000 a lecture, like once a month, or, at least once a month or something
Wow.
like that. And
I wish I could do that.
we see that Mars really powerfully placed on the media circuit there.
Yeah,
In
for
control
sure.
of the second house of income. Very, very strong Mars there.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah, for sure.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both so much for going through some of these chart examples. And I think, again, it is a question that comes up a lot, whether you're working with students or people will ask, I've got these empty houses, what's going on? How do we look? So again, we're just going back to the ruler, we're looking at the conditions and all these type of things. So just because you have, and where the planets are in the chart, I mean, there's going to be a lot of activity there. Obviously here we've looked at the 9th house, there is a lot of activity. But again, just because you have an empty house doesn't mean there's no activity. There's always something going to be connected to every house you've got in the chart. So thank you for going through these and putting them together.
And the
Yeah,
activity,
I think that's an important, I think that's an important summary, really. We have to remember that each of us has an interest in each one of these houses. So it's not like we get to skip over, oh, it's not important to me that I have, resources, or it might be more or less important, but everybody has resources or has to eat. Everybody has to be born. All of these things relate to all of us. It's just a question of how much emphasis is placed there.
Absolutely.
And the houses will be connected. So the empty house, the matters of that empty house are going to be connected to the expression that's actually happening in the populated house. So we know that Deepak Chopra makes his money, empty second house, spreading the word, writing books with the philosophy, the media tours, the big lectures, 9th house, 9th house, 9th house. So that is going to be connected. And we would have to look at what is the planetary function, what is the element, what is the sign, what's going on with that planet at every level, and not just to read the sign on the empty house cusp.
Absolutely.
That's right. Yeah.
Wonderful descriptions. So lastly, but not least, we're going to talk a bit about W101, which is what we call our magic trifecta in W101. I say that Donna and Vanessa, they're the real instructors. I'm there as an assistant, but we love this class and all the students that come through. So Donna and Vanessa, how would you like to describe 101? And I know we're coming up to spring semester as well, so maybe we can talk about the dates and what's coming up for W101, if anyone would like to join.
Yeah, for sure. So W101 is an introduction to astrology, but you have to kind of come in already knowing your glyphs and some real fundamentals like that. So it's not like starting at zero. You have to at least have your glyphs memorized, or at least memorize them in a quick hurry if you haven't got that figured out. But from there on, what we try to do is to teach you the building blocks in such a way that you're able to put sentences together yourself. So I'm talking about planets, signs, houses, aspects. We talk about all those things and more. And what we're trying to do is give you the tools so that when you're trying to do a chart interpretation, you're not having to look at books and say, oh, what does it mean when this planet is in this sign? That you're able to put together the ideas of, well, I know that it's mutable. I know that it's air. And I know that it's going to be either a masculine or feminine or yin yang, whatever words you want to use to describe polarity. And what are the images that are evoked when I put those things together, so that you're able to come up with your own sentences without having to go into the cookbooks and read someone else's interpretation. So that's the biggest goal, I think.
I think that's a really important distinction. So I know many people out there, they'll watch podcasts, or they'll pick up bits and pieces online or social media, all those kind of things. But I think the importance of 101 is what you're mentioning, Donna, is the synthesis. So, okay, you might know bits and pieces, but through the weeks as we go through, we're talking about building the story, building the picture, and synthesizing the information to get to a point, as Donna is saying, that you don't have to go to an outside resource to go, what's this, what's that? you as the astrologer are now beginning to put the pieces together and delineate the charts by yourself without outside help, which I think is a very important distinction in 101. Vanessa, how would you like to explain what we do?
I think you two have described it beautifully. I just want to add that sometimes coming in new, we see some of the most brilliant insights from people who are brand new to the material, coming at it completely clean, learning from the bottom up. So it's we welcome all and nothing to be afraid of. Really,
yeah, I mean, I
fun.
think that's a really good point. That's a great point, Vanessa, because we get people who are coming in who are brand new to astrology, and we also get people coming in who have been studying astrology or even practicing astrology. You know, we've had people that have been practicing astrology or being, you know, seeing clients for as much as 20 years come into this class because they just want to get their foundations stronger. And so there's a place for everybody, regardless of the level. You know, if you just want to firm up your education, it's a really great place to do that. And we do have some free quizzes on our website if you're not sure where you land, because you can test out of this course. If you think that your knowledge already, your foundation is solid, you can test out of this course and move on to the next level. You can even test out of the next level. So there's lots of ways that you can move into working towards a certificate or a diploma at Kepler College, and you don't want to, you know, be afraid that perhaps you're in the wrong place, because we'll always work with you to make sure that you're starting at the level that's most appropriate for you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, being a Kepler graduate myself, I think one of the main points of distinction for Kepler College is that sense of community. So if you come, I know we've had students in 101 and they have cohorts. They'll go off into maybe 102 and they'll keep in contact with one another. So there are many fantastic self-taught astrologers out there, but really having that sense of community. We have live classes every Sunday, so you can come into the class, ask your questions, and then we have the forums where people can speak to one another. And it's just that wonderful sense of community where everyone comes together and talks astrology. So it's just wherever you are in the world, you can, you know, meet with other like-minded people. And again, just that wonderful sense of the community. And a lot of our 101 students who give our feedback at the end of the courses say how wonderful those experiences have been and how much it's helped them develop their own skills by bouncing off other astrologers or students as well. So I think that's an important point. Absolutely. So what's the date? What's the date of spring? I should know that, but I don't. What's the
The next class, okay, the next term begins April 10th. The first live class is going to be April 16th, but you do want to register before that because there's assignments that people are working on before the first live lecture. So you can sign up until then, but yeah, we'd recommend you do it before.
Wonderful, wonderful. And for everybody watching, we'll put pop-ups during this video. And if you want to see the link below this video in the description, you can click there and it'll take you straight to our website where you can register and see what else is going on there. Or if you wish to test out, as Donna was saying before as well, you feel like you know a little bit more, then maybe do one of our challenge tests and try that out too. So thank you so much, Vanessa and Donna, for joining me today. It's always a pleasure when we all get together, and what a fantastic topic.
Thank you for
thanks,
hosting.
Callum.
It's always fun.
Thank you. Thanks for watching. Bye, everybody. Cheers.
Bye.